co-organizzatori per l'invito, che ho volentieri accettato. And now I switch to English for the second.
Sì, yes.
Ok. So vorrei togliere questa finestrella. Aspettate solo un secondo. I share just the window. So, okay. So it's better. Okay, so thank you for the invitation again. My talk will be related to the work we have done during the past year with a few colleagues on the development of models for simulating the COVID-19 epidemic in Italy, and in particular on the recent advances that we have proposed for accounting for virus variants and vaccination campaign. So where we started from is obviously, as we all know, there have been many different statistical and differential models that have been proposed to analyze and forecast COVID-19 epidemic evolution. Some of them are based on classical SIR or SEIR or SEIRD models. Some other have been ad hoc developed to account for a specific characteristic of COVID-19. We have seen a few examples during previous seminars of this series. Some of them account for spatial temporal dynamics, and some are based on network or PD. I will develop a couple of, I will talk about a couple of models, detailing one of them, and if I have time, mentioning also a second activity on a second model, which is an ad hoc model developed for COVID-19. And starting from this point, I want to stress the fact that our elaboration on this was really starting from the data that were made available 1 year ago about the evolution of the epidemic. So our data repository, reference data repository, is the one that the Dipartimento di Protezione Civile published now 1 year and a half ago, but also some more recent data that the Istituto Superiore di Sanità made available starting end of 2020, and which contain much more detail about the classification of the different subjects with respect to clinical status and age. Finally, since I'm also interested in looking at the vaccination campaign, the other data source which is relevant for us is the other repository where all the data regarding vaccine in Italy are collected. Those data are not perfect, as we all know. Some of them, or most of them, are only available at the national scale. There is a huge non-uniformity on the quality of those data with respect to the source. So, for instance, different regions publish data with different accuracy, with different report delays. And in some cases, those data are affected by very large problem that one should fix, in some case manually, in order the model that are going to be calibrated on those data to supply reasonable results. We will see a couple of examples during the talk. What was, first of all, making epidemiologic models was not our work since until 1 year ago. Is not our work now, but we thought that it was worthwhile to give our contribution with possible new ideas in a situation where the crisis was hitting our society, the whole world, and we believe that our contribution could supply some additional, could be an effort that could be useful for some of those scope. In particular, what we have done, as I mentioned before, is a design and calibration of new models that I will describe. We also work on data analysis and visualization, which were made available by dashboard that is called the EPIMOX dashboard, in which we try to combine both visualization of the available data and in combination with the forecast that or the scenario analysis that the differential model that we have developed can guarantee in order to perform both what if scenario looking backward in time and forecast scenarios looking at the different possible evolution that the epidemic may have in the next future, also depending on different possible choices that the authorities may take. What was the wish list we considered this as a starting point when we started developing the model? First thing was to try to set up a model in which a compartmental model in which compartments were matching as much as possible with the available data. Second thing that was particularly critical at the beginning of the epidemic, as we all know, we wanted a model able to track also the infected but undetected individuals. We all know that at the beginning of, in particular at the beginning of the epidemic, but in a lower amount in the whole time history of the epidemic, there is a portion of the infected population which is not detected at the beginning due to a very low number of swab and a strong stress on the system. The number of undetected infected people was estimated to be much larger than the detected one. So we want a model able to, in some way, and we will see how, to track also this portion of the infected people, and not only to track it, but take into account that a large part of the infection would be associated to these compartments. Moreover, the parameter of our model should, in some cases, some of the parameter should be able to take into account the fact that the different contribution in the model may change during time. In particular, when different non-pharmaceutical interventions are prescribed, we may observe a different change in the, for instance, transmission rate, but also, for instance, related to the vaccination campaign, other parameters governing the worsening between one level of infection and one level of severity of the disease and a more severe level may depend on the amount of people which is vaccinated. In order, we would like to have a model that is able to build a forecast at least for a short-term time window, that is a couple of weeks, 1 month. Okay, this first part of the talk is related to the original model that been proposed in a paper recently, and that was related to the simulation of the second epidemic wave in Italy. So this model was introduced and used to follow and to simulate and at some extent to forecast what happened in Italy between summer 2020 and end of 2020. This model is called the Sweeter, from the name of the 7 compartments that are considered: susceptible individuals, undetected individuals, which are again those which are infected but not detected, isolated individuals, which are those who are isolated at home, hospitalized, all people which is in hospital for COVID reason, not being in intensive care unit. The latter are collected in the threatened compartment. And finally, the 2 possible exit compartment are obviously the extinct compartment and the recovered one. Again, this model has been introduced when vaccine did not exist. So we will see later either vaccine and variant were not already present or relevant. So we will see in a few minutes how this model will have been later or more recently extended to account for this additional compartment. Just mentioning briefly, with one strong hypothesis we do is that contagion happen only when people is undetected. So even those people that are going to be detected in this model infect someone else in the period where they are not yet detected. This is a strong hypothesis, but is quite reasonable in order to keep under control the number of transmission rate that one should consider. Then once a person is infected, becomes obviously an undetected, he or she can move to another compartment with different probability and different characteristic in time, either after a diagnosis move into the isolated compartment, or by recovering without being detected and move into the R compartment. Again, the isolated may worsen their condition and move to hospital, or they can heal, or in principle can die as isolated. Hospitalized person can either further worsen their condition and entering intensive care unit, or die or heal. And finally, people in intensive care unit can improve their condition, going back to hospital, let's say to other room in hospital, which is not intensive care units, and unfortunately also die. In this model, you see that we have the possibility to enter the extinct compartment from each of the I, H, and T compartment. Then, and this is related to the data we have at our disposal, we did a further assumption where we had only people in intensive care unit that could die. This is again a very strong assumption. So the first result that you will see, do not assume that gamma I, which is the mortality rate for the isolated, and gamma H, which is the mortality rate for the hospitalized, are zero. Then these assumptions have been relaxed in more recent version of the model. I was mentioning the fact that it's important that at least some of the parameter can change in time, but in order both to be able to calibrate the model and to keep under control the number of parameters to be calibrated, some of them have been considered constant. In this first version, the detection rate is constant. The recovery and improving rate, theta and rho, are all constant, and also the mortality rate is considered constant over time. The other parameter that have been found to be useful to be left free to change in time are the transmission rate beta U, the worsening rate omega H and omega T, and the mortality rate. The mortality rate for the intensive care unit, so the threatened compartment, has been left free to change, while the isolated was kept constant, while the mortality rate for the hospitalized was set to zero in this version. Then what does it mean, change in time? It means that we consider piecewise constant value of those parameters in different phases in which we subdivided the time window we were considering for the analysis. In this case, as I mentioned before, the analysis was starting during summer 2020, in particular August 20, and simulate the system until end of December, and forecasted it in let's say it's simulated until end of December or 15th of January, depending on what on the result that I will discuss later. How did we subdivide this time interval? We decided in that at that stage to subdivide the time along with some critical event that may play a role in the change of the parameter. In particular, those events are collected here. Sorry, this should be September 24. It is the school opening in all the Italian regions. Then there were different interventions related to the change of non-pharmaceutical intervention again that we all know really changed the condition in which we lived during that phase. And in this respect, I should mention the fact that choosing the suitable set of interval that are required to get a good calibration is not that straightforward, and this is the reason why in a more recent version of the model, as I will mention, we got rid of this idea of correlating directly the time phases with critical event. Anyway, I want to show these results that have been obtained in this condition. How did we calibrate the model? Obviously, the model is solved numerically with standard Runge-Kutta fourth order time advances scheme, but we don't know the value of the parameters, and what we developed is a two-step calibration procedure. Unfortunately, for most of these, or for many of these parameters, we don't have a clinical estimate. So we decided to proceed in the definition of, in the evaluation of the parameter in the following way. First, we solved by a least square procedure a minimization problem in order to minimize the least square, the quadratic error between the compartment that for which we have data, in particular isolated, hospitalized, threatened, extinct, and RD, which is a subclass of the recovery compartment, which is strictly related to the available recovered data. So we know that we measure how many people has recovered. We have a data series for that data, but in a model in which also the undetected people can recover, we should isolate only the recovered from detected. So in any case, we will have a time series of experimental, or let's say measured data for these 5 compartments, and our model will produce numerical or simulated time history depending on the value of the parameter. What we solve in this first stage is a least square minimization problem by finding the set of parameter, or a set of parameter that at least locally minimize this function. Then, in order to take into account the fact that we may want to keep under control the robustness of this estimate, what we consider is MCMC Monte Carlo Markov chain procedure, where the prior distribution for the parameter were taken as a uniform distribution centered in intervals centered in the least square estimate. In this way, we could obtain posterior distribution of for each parameter, which was the product of this MCMC procedure. And what we see in the bottom part of this slide is the resulting value of the median and 95% confidence interval for those parameters that were taken constant in the whole time window. And while on the right table, we have the time varying values in each phase for the 4 parameters that were changing during the phases. In the left table, you also have a couple of additional data for which we want to keep track of the uncertainty, which is the initial data. Why I say that? Because one of the objective that, one of the property that we wanted to consider in order to easily use this model in different framework was the capability to start the model at any time, not requiring the model to be started always from, let's say, February 2020. This is particularly critical because since our model is tracking the undetected compartment, having a reasonable estimate of the number of undetected we consider at the beginning is important. And what we thought it was that our point of view on this aspect was that it was probably better to find a way to estimate those quantity which are not covered by data. And if you look at the 7 compartment, the 2 compartment which are not covered by data are essentially the undetected compartment and the recovered compartment, knowing that the recovered can be from detected and undetected. So what we try to develop is a strategy to estimate the number of undetected person in a specific time during the evolution of the epidemic and the number of recovered at the same time. And we did it based on the following assumption. We consider the fact that at least until the vaccine started playing a role, the infection fatality rate could be estimated as a constant value. This 1.2% of infection fatality rate was an estimate that was produced by a study from Imperial College and has been also confirmed by other studies. On the other hand, what we observe during time when we look at the case fatality ratio referred to a specific time window may give us a good indication of the amount of people that have been detected or not. In particular, the ratio between the CFR estimated in a time window. Now here we took a time window of about 1 month centered in time t, and we compute the CFR at time t as the ratio between the resolved case, those cases that in that period have been resolved, unfortunately, by a death, and the total number of resolved cases in the same time window. The ratio between this CFR and the IFR can be considered as an estimate of the detection percentage, the percentage of the detected people during the same period. Based on this consideration, we proposed as a relation to estimate the number of recovered people at time t, just this relation you find here, which is based on the definition of infection fatality ratio, and by a simple argument that for those who are interested can be found in the paper on Twitter. We also estimated the undetected people at time t based on this ratio between the time-dependent CFR and the IFR. How accurate is this procedure? It's something that has to be proven, obviously. We can say that the estimate we have on the recovered individuals at August 2020 is very close to estimate that have been published in the literature by different authors. So we believe that this this way of starting our simulation from, for instance, August 20 could be much more accurate than starting the simulation from February 20, since in those periods between February 20 and August 20, we may lose the accuracy on the undetected because we don't have data on the undetected. Okay, so after this discussion, the model initialization, I just briefly show the results we got applying the method and the calibration to the second wave. In particular, these plots are covering really the second wave, but the simulation started a little bit before, again, August 20. And what you can see is that the model is able to cover in a pretty good way the range of data, which are those data which are plotted here as a full dot, which are the calibration data. And also in the validation data, which is the dashed line you have after January the 1st, 2021, which is a time interval of, in this case, of 2 weeks, you can see that also the forecast is quite satisfactory, since the median value is close to the actual evolution in time of the measured data, which were not used after January 1st for the calibration. And also, when looking at those compartments, such as, for instance, the new positive compartment, which was not used as a calibration compartment, the results, in particular in the forecast time interval, is quite satisfactory. We also, okay, this is a simulation performed at the national level. I forgot to say that as I mentioned before, the model is a ODE system evolving just in time. There is one geographical location where you can apply the model. These are results obtained when the Italian geographical location is considered, so the simulation is at national level. You can also apply the model at the regional level, taking data that unfortunately are much less smooth than the one you can observe at the national level, since some evident problem in reporting is highlighted more when you look at single regions. But also in this case, we are quite satisfied about the ability of the model to capture most of the compartment also in the forecast part of the simulation. Finally, to conclude on this first adoption of the model, of this version of the model, analyzing the second epidemic wave in Italy, we use the model to see at which extent this kind of model is able to predict the occurrence of a peak, both in terms of the peak value and in terms of the peak occurrence date. And what you can see is that even starting 15 or even 20 days before the peak actually occurred, so using the data until 20 to 15 days, we could see in the forecast that a peak would have occurred. And obviously, by taking a number of days getting closer and closer to when the peak actually occurred, the accuracy of this prediction improved. It's also important to see that in the peak was always covered by the confidence interval that the model was considering. Okay, let's come to the problem, limitation, and possible improvement that this model could have. Okay, first of all, we noticed that the fact that many parameters were time dependent, and some of them were not easy to be controlled and to be assessed. For instance, the worsening parameter create a problem on the robustness of the calibration. Moreover, when additional data became available, for instance, the new admission in intensive care unit, we found out that some of the fluxes, I mean, even if the calibration was following the compartment that have been used for the calibration, some of the fluxes were not well captured. For instance, this was the result of a comparison between the flux of the people entering in the threatened compartment and the actual new admission that were made available later on at the end of December. So what we did is trying to improve the model by reducing the number of time-dependent parameter, building this time series of those parameters, starting directly from the data that in the meanwhile have been made available. For instance, the worsening rate for the isolated, the worsening rate for hospitalized could be estimated by using the new admission in hospital and the new admission in intensive care unit. Moreover, we also changed the way we deal with the detection rate, and we use the same relation that was used before in the initialization to estimate the detection rate. Okay, so the detection rate can be seen as the probability of being detected divided by the mean time of detection, and by assuming 8 days as a characteristic time for detection, and by using this ratio that we have discussed before, we could have a reasonable estimate of delta changing in time. This has had a good impact on the model, and in particular here you see that we could obtain again good. This is just the median value of our calibration. Good calibration on the compartment that we used, for which we use the data, but also fulfilling the evolution. I mean, matching the evolution of, for instance, the new entry, the new admission in intensive care unit. How did we extend this model? For taking into account the two big changes that we have observed this year. First update was related to the appearance of variants, which we know are characterized in particular by a very different transmission rate with respect to the virus version that was dominant just before a particular variant appeared. For instance, when looking back in February, we observed the alpha, what used to be called the UK variant, the alpha variant, that in just 1 month and a half became prevalent with respect to the wild type virus, due to the fact that he had a 37% higher transmission rate. The same happened this summer with the Delta variant that essentially replaced the Alpha variant in 1 month or two. So this kind of model, where you have we have divided into the compartment, distinguishing the base virus, which is, if you want, the virus version which is dominant at the beginning of the simulation, and the variant that we are considering. This kind of model is particularly relevant when one wants to simulate the time frame in which a variant is becoming prevalent. Okay, how do we deal with these additional parameters that are essentially the base transmission rate for and the variant transmission rate? And how do we deal with the initialization of these two compartments? Okay, so what we do is running a simulation and calibrating a model until a specific time. Okay, let's assume we are at the beginning of February. We know that the variant is showing up. So we calibrate our model until beginning of February. And then that model has, as a result of this calibration, we know that at beginning of February, we have a certain number of undetected people, and we have a global transmission rate beta U. Starting from an hypothesis which is coming from the estimate that ISSS supply related to the prevalence in a specific time, we can subdivide the U at the beginning of the new simulation that we will perform from February the 1st on in two portions. So one portion is related to the variant. So we take the prevalence, the percentage of the new variant with respect to the total infected in that moment, and we assume that the people which are undetected and infected with the variant is PV times U T0. Similarly, the other portion is 1 minus PV times U. Now, the beta U that we calibrated in the last phase before February the 1st is a global beta U that can be assumed to be a linear combination between the beta U associated to the base version of the virus and the beta U associated to the variant of the virus. Taking into account that we know an estimate of the increased transmission rate, for instance, FV will be 1.37 when we are analyzing the evolution between the wild type virus and the alpha variant. FV will be 1.5 when we are following the evolution between the alpha variant and the delta variant. Inverting this relation, we can obtain an estimate of the transmission rate at the beginning of the simulation, and then taking into account the fact that we are following the evolution of UV and UB, we can also update beta in time in the period where the prevalence is changing. So this was extremely useful to be able to capture a forecast of the new rise of the epidemic that happened at the beginning of March. So with the original model, without the alpha variant, we would not have been able to see that the epidemic would have show a new increase in the coming week. A second extension that have become, let's say, mandatory since the vaccination campaign happened at the end of December was related to the vaccines. So how did we modify the model? The first version of this new model with vaccine added a couple of new compartments, which are the compartment counting the number of people which is vaccinated with one dose at a specific time, and the number of people which is vaccinated and not infected at each time. So these two compartments are not just collecting the people who received one or two doses, but it's taking into account that, as we all know, vaccinated people can be infected. So what you will see is that from the susceptible compartment, we can move to the V1 compartment by a certain rate, which is related. I'm not going into detail here, but this scaling factor, DV1 is the data that is daily supplied, saying how many first dose are delivered every day. But since we know that those doses are not always supplied to susceptible, but in some cases are supplied to people which has already recovered. In particular, those people who have recovered from COVID without even knowing that they were affected by COVID. We had to rescale this factor. But anyway, we can move from susceptible to V1 compartment by a certain rate, and then from V1 to V2 by another rate. But we can also move from V1 and V2 to the undetected compartment, since, as I was mentioning, it's still possible to be infected when we are vaccinated. Otherwise, we know that the probability to be infected is much smaller, and in the case of 2 doses, much smaller. So we have some additional constant, which are taken known a priori, which take into account the lower probability to be infected once vaccinated. So what is how vaccine enter the model in the full and in the current model is by this reduced transmission rate accounted for by sigma 1 and sigma 2 coefficient, and a second way the model should enter, and these define the last version of the model that I will going to show in the next slide, should also take into account that not only vaccinated people get infected with a lower probability, but also their transition between the different degree of severity in the infection and until the mortality rate are strongly affected by the fact of being infected as susceptible or vaccinated 1 or 2. So we took from the current or the most recent bollettino di sorveglianza integrata from Istituto Superiore di Sanità, the estimate, which are evolving in time but are nowadays quite stabilized as estimate for both the reduction of probability to get to being hospitalized when we are vaccinated in 1 or 2 doses, the probability to get admitted in intensive care unit, and the probability to die. So based on these parameters that again are assumed are taken from those survey, we proceed in the following way. We are going to change omega I, omega H, and gamma I, that is the probability to worsening their condition for people which are isolated, for people which are hospitalized, or the probability to die for people that are isolated. How do we proceed in this rescaling? We know that at a certain instant, at the beginning of our simulation, which can be, once again, any time during the evolution of the pandemic, we have a certain value of omega I that have been estimated, as I showed before, starting from the data that are coming from ISS. Now, we know that in our simulation, this worsening condition may change in time based on the fact that in the time frame we are going to simulate, the number of vaccinated people will typically increase with respect to the beginning. So what we do is estimating 3 fraction, US, U1, and U2, that are approximating the number of new cases that can be estimated to be susceptible, vaccinated 1, and vaccinated 2. Okay, we know that the total number of new cases can be seen here. The total number of new cases will be ST plus sigma 1 V1 plus sigma 2 V2 times beta U over N. If I take the ratio between this quantity and, the ratio between S and this quantity, I may estimate how many people which is the portion of the people that are becoming infected at a specific time is becoming infected as susceptible or as vaccinated in in first dose or vaccinated in second dose. And based on this portion, we can rescale our worsening and mortality rate, normalizing it on the same fraction at the beginning of the simulation. Otherwise, we could lose an effect coming from the initialization choice. Putting together these two variants of the model that we have discussed, I show you the current model that we are using in our simulation, which account for both the variant and the vaccine. And this model have been used to produce forecasting that have been are collected in a forecast hub at this website, together with other forecasting models. And in particular, this is what I'm showing is our forecast for the 1 week prediction of the weekly cases and death. And the good news is that when compared to many other models for this kind of short time prediction, the performance of our model is quite competitive. It's always between among the first three models. I should add that many of the models are computing forecasting for all the European countries, and we are focusing on Italy. So probably our job is easier since we are focusing on just one specific country. I just want to move towards the end of my talk by analyzing, by discussing how those kind of models can be used in this phase. First of all, we all know that the number of vaccine is increasing. This is a snapshot of one report from ISS of July, where one can compare the number of vaccinated people and the number of new cases subdivided between vaccinated 1, vaccinated 2, and non-vaccinated. It's obvious that the number of new cases will not be proportional to the number of people vaccinated, since non-vaccinated people are infected with a much higher probability. So we use the framework I've shown before to extend, if you want, these which are actual data which have been used as which have monitored the time history to predict what we should expect in terms of a number of people of subdivision between V1, V2, and non-vaccinated people in the coming weeks or months. And even if today just 24% of the population over 12 is not fully vaccinated, we should expect, if the vaccination rate goes on with the same speed as today, or as the average of the past 15 days, that still at the mid of November, we may have almost half of the people that are get infected, which are still not vaccinated, which means that we should not expect the mortality or the fraction of people getting into intensive care unit to be 1 or 5% of what we observed 1 year ago, because still there is a large portion of the people which is not vaccinated, which, I mean, there is a large portion of new cases which will be not vaccinated. What we have done in the past weeks is using this model to account for the contribution of Green Pass. So we have analyzed what would happen in the coming weeks. That is since this analysis that have been carried out last week, in 3 different scenarios where the Green Pass was fully applied, without Green Pass, and with a Green Pass with, let's say, applied 50%, which means that maybe the control over the application was only partial. And the good news is that the expected new wave that can be associated to the school reopening that we have seen last week, and in general the increase on the contact that we should expect to happen in these weeks does not seem to have obviously an impact equivalent to that of last year, where we observed the second wave exploding in a few weeks. But again, this shows that it's important to keep under control at which extent the Green Pass rules are actually verified. And we also analyzed the effect of different vaccination rate, so we can see which is the impact of improving or increasing the number of doses in the coming weeks on the evolution of the different compartments. A few words, but I know that the time is going over, so a few words. This model has been integrated in a dashboard that is freely available, and you can access at this address, epimox.polimi.it. In this dashboard, you can visualize, compare, and by normalizing and rescaling and using log scale, you can actually highlight some interesting feature. For instance, it has been observed that the delay between an inflection point on essentially all the significant curves and the maxima of the same curve is constantly 20 days, let's say, for both the second and the third wave. So it's interesting to highlight this kind of feature because they may help in supporting the decision maker. All these discussion on the Epimox dashboard can be seen on this reference where we actually presented the tool. And finally, I'm just going to mention the fact that the Epimox dashboard have been also combined with the differential model. So different possible scenarios can be simulated, accounting for different choices. In some phases, that was more critical than now because we could simulate it what happened if from the next day a change in regime from red, yellow, or orange region have been chosen. Now things are probably less. I mean, we still have some different scenario that can be analyzed, but the differences are smaller, let's say. Okay, I think I have to end up. I'm sorry to have been late. I don't have time to, I just mentioned the fact that we have another model that we are working on where age and context of exposition are taken into account. And this is the dream that is for the coming month is to merge the two approaches. So extending the sweeter model with an age structure, where the critical part here will be having a calibration based on age structure data, which are partially available now. We want to study a different way of initializing our calibration, in particular, taking other possible options to compute our priors, and adding other details in the model, accounting for the immunity duration, third dose. And finally, we also have an activity which has been carried out up to now by a master student of ours related to optimal control strategies. And we plan to apply this kind of approach to the full sweeter model. Thank you. Sorry, I just put the last slide. This is a joint work with other people, Giovanni Ardenghi, Luca Dedè, Alfio Quarteroni, and Giulia Villani. And the part of this work have been also shared with other people, in particular the authors of the first publication on Sweeter, Paolo Antonietti, Andrea Mazzoni, Edie Miglio, Andrea, and Marco Grani. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Nicola. Thank you for the very interesting talk. There is time for some questions. I see that there is already one in the chat. And Stefano Miccoli is asking, how is the effect of Green Pass estimated? I don't know if you want to elaborate on this, Stefano, or we just ask this.
No, it's just a curiosity. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I just take this slide to explain in all the scenario, including the Green Pass scenario, are obtained by modifying the transmission rate. Sorry, I'm getting the right slide. Working on the contact matrices. So we started from contact matrices, which describe differentiated by age and by context of exposition, the number of contact and actually the risk of contact associated to different age and the different context of exposition. And then what we do is computing, let's say, a restriction coefficient, which is associated to a given restriction scenario. So when we had to implement what happened when a region moved from yellow to orange or to red, we touched the number of contacts associated to those contexts where things were changing. For instance, school closing would affect mainly the ages of people going to school. Other intervention related to leisure, opening of restaurant, bar would act on other contexts. So for each kind of situation we want to simulate, we can compute a level restriction coefficient, let's say, which is a weighted average of all these transmission rates, which are again separated by age and by context. And in particular for the Green Pass, what we estimate on those time history that I showed is what happened if we leave everybody entering in school and university, regardless they have been vaccinated or not. There is an assumption here. Green Pass in this model coincide with vaccination, not with a possible swab that one may take, which is probably a reasonable assumption. And in that case, we can actually build two different restriction coefficient associated to the imposition of the Green Pass and the partial imposition or the no imposition. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, other questions? I see Corrado, please speak. Just unmute yourself and you can speak.
Yes, thank you very much for the talk, which is very, very interesting. Actually, I have one question relative to the modeling. As far as I know, as far as I understand, everything is based on this idea that contagion appears because there is a contact between an infected person with a susceptible person. So at the very end, it is based on a law which is pretty much the same as the mass action law. Why this is usually makes sense in the case of rarefied population. But in the case of a very high density, the situation is more delicate. So it could be that the real function that you have to implement is not the product of S times U, for example, in the first equation, but it's something different with some powers, for example. Have you also tried to implement some kind of different model in which you have some exponent, for example, some nonlinear function, some nonlinearity, for example, in the incident rate? I don't know if
Thank you for the, I mean, it's a very good question. It's extremely important what you say, and we are aware of this limitation. We prefer to concentrate our effort in extending models that are actually still currently used and take this hypothesis, this assumption as valid, extending it to include other kind of effect. But I totally agree that it would be very interesting to take into account non-linearity in this respect. Maybe extending what have already been proposed for simpler models to this more involved model. Something that we may consider for the coming future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? There is a question in the chat by Enrico Lunedei, who writes, are beta values given by calibration compatible with enforced restrictions?
Okay, this is a good question. Let me see if I can answer by one table. Okay, here you can see the time evolution of beta U in the time frame between end of August 2020 and end of December. You can observe a reasonable correlation in the sense that the maximum value of R0, let's say, and was essentially obtained by this calibration. And what maybe would answer better your question, since is more related to the restriction than to the R0, is in a slide that I probably removed in the last version, so I put it as a backup slide. So here, what we have observed is the following thing. In our dashboard, you can see in the top part of the dashboard a bar plot where essentially the color regime is reported, subdivided by region. So what we have observed is, I mean, a way we use the dashboard is to look if there is some correlation between the actual MPI imposition that were different in different regions and the actual evolution of the system. These can maybe later on with a suitable calibration of the regional model be also correlated with beta. But here you can observe that, for instance, in the top picture on the right, I mean, the top picture, you have 3 regions, Lombardia, Veneto, Emilia-Romagna. Lombardia was the region which introduced the strongest restriction during January. And you actually observe a much faster reduction of the cases in Lombardy than in the region where the restrictions were milder, okay? And the same happened in pretty much all the region, northern or southern region. So a rigorous analysis of a correlation between MPI and the values of beta has not been performed. What I may say is that in the forecasting part of our model, we use this kind of, I mean, we adopted this kind of correlation. So obviously, I guess a rigorous investigation on this aspect may, let's say, strengthen the role of the way we use the MPI change in the future. So if we observe that a correlation is present in the data, we can better use in the forecast. So this is something that may be interesting to consider in a more complete and rigorous way. Thank you for the question.
Okay, I see another question in the chat by Martina, who asked if there is any reason to choose a time window of 28 days when you compute the case fatality rate.
No, we just wanted to have a suitable width of the window in order to have a time history of this detection rate, which was not too noisy. Okay, so we expect that the evolution in the detection rate has a frequency, let's say, a characteristic frequency, which is lower than other signal, because the change in detection rate is essentially related to, we observe very big change in detection rate between the first phase, the first wave, and the second wave, because the system was not ready. The number of Schwab was really minimal at the beginning. So we think that having a time window which is probably large, as a 1 month, it's enough to capture the characteristic frequency of that time signal, and let's say large enough to have a signal which is not too noisy.
Thank you. I saw that Fabiana Zama raised her hand, so probably she wants to ask a question.
Yes, so thank you very much. It is a very interesting, of course. And I have just a couple of curiosities about the computational environment. Where did you develop all the simulations and forecasts? Did you choose Python, Math?
Yeah, this is all implemented in Python.
Oh, okay.
We actually have a version of the model which already implement either a multi-age or even a multi-location model with all the network related to the movement between one location and the other. So the software infrastructure is even much more involved than the one we have used for the simulation I showed. Unfortunately, for the multi-age and multi-location, for at least for the model we choose to use with several different compartments strictly related to the data, it's very difficult to calibrate this multi-age or multi-city or multi-age model. So, and this is all done in Python. Also, the MCMC calibration procedure is all in Python, and make use of the PyMCMC stat library, which is freely available. So
just to know,
we didn't implement the MCMC. We used that.
So the optimization method that you used to estimate the parameters was a Monte Carlo method, basically.
Yeah, we have a first step, which is a least square, that we use to compute, let's say, a uniform, the center of the interval for our prior. Yeah. And this is obtained solving a least square problem with standard minimization optimization tool, still in Python CPy minimize. And then the second step is MCMC procedure that take those interval as priors. And this use MCMC stat library.
And just
actually, all the details on the library we use are reported in the paper, so you can find some.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks to everybody. Are there other questions? I think we already had a few. So if nobody else has a question, I think we can thank again Nicola for the interesting talk. And I remind you all that next week there will be a talk by During, and you will receive all of you will receive the link to participate in this next week. Grazie a tutti allora, e grazie specialmente a Nicola.
Grazie a voi. Buona serata a tutti.
Grazie.
Arrivederci a tutti allora.
Arrivederci.